everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Anne, but I also go by my nickname Nini. I like to focus on Midwest true crime because I'm a Minnesota farmer's daughter. Today we're gonna go to Kansas. In the early 1980s, a Kansas minister fell in love with one of his parishioners. They planned to give up their lives in the Midwest, move to New Mexico, and start over. The only problem, they were both married to other people. Within 4 months, both the minister's wife and the parishioner's husband are dead. Today we're going to talk about the murders of Sandra Bird and Martin Anderson. Tom and Sandra Bird were high school sweethearts. Sandra, also known as Sandy, was valedictorian. Tom described himself as a jock, although pictures suggest otherwise. They got married in the 1970s and had 3 children. Tom was a minister and Sandy was a college mathematics professor. In 1982, when Tom and Sandy were both 33, she was offered a job teaching math at Emporia State University, so the family moved from Arkansas to Emporia, Kansas. Sandy already had a master's degree in math, and the job at the college allowed an opportunity for her to start taking courses to complete a doctorate's degree in math and computer science. I am not known for my math skills. I could not imagine getting a bachelor's degree in math, which ironically my mother has, let alone a doctorate's degree in math and computer science. So Sandy was a smart cookie. While she was known for being intelligent, Sandy was also known for being bubbly and outgoing and having an infectious smile. Her family meant the world to her. Emporia is a town of about 25,000 people and is in between Topeka and Wichita. It's what you would picture when you picture a Midwest town. It's surrounded by prairie land and corn and bean fields. As the Birds settled into their new life in Kansas, Tom began preaching at Faith Lutheran Church, and he very quickly gained a reputation for being a really good pastor. He was known for his friendliness and being able to draw people into his sermons. He was so popular as a minister, people began to flock to Faith Lutheran to listen to his sermons. One family who started attending Faith Lutheran was Martin and Lorna Anderson. Martin worked as a lab supervisor for a healthcare facility, and Lorna was a stay-at-home mom to their 4 daughters. From the outside, the Andersons had a perfect marriage and a great family life, but as is often the case, that's not how things really were. Lorna had a lot of men on the side, and it doesn't sound like it was much of a secret around town. One lady described Lorna as a lady of the night. The babysitter talked about how different men would come over to the house, and she was instructed to go down to the basement with the children and stay down there with them while Lorna entertained the men upstairs. I'm not sure if Martin was aware of his wife's hobbies, but like I said, it really wasn't much of a secret around town. The Andersons struggled with money, so Lorna decided to get a part-time job. She started working for Faith Lutheran as Tom Bird's secretary, and the two became close. I think you can all see where this story is going. People knew of Lorna's associations with other men, so when people in town started to see how much time Lorna and Tom spent together, they assumed that the preacher and his secretary were having an affair. In July 1983, Sandra was promoted at the college. On Saturday, July 16th, she and Tom got a babysitter for their kids and went out to eat to celebrate. They stopped back at their house to grab bottles of wine and whiskey and told the babysitter they'd be back by 10:30. They then went to Faith Lutheran to drink in Tom's office and continue their celebration. At one point, Tom said Sandy left to go to her office at the college, and she told him she'd come back to pick him up and then they would go home. But Sandy never returned. Tom was obviously worried when she didn't show up, so he called the police and reported her missing. He went back home, hoping that she would be there, but she was not. The next morning, some people went to the Cottonwood River southeast of Emporia to canoe. They went to a launch area near the Rocky Ford Bridge. They saw in the water below the bridge a station wagon that was upside down and partially submerged in water. Sandy's body was floating face down nearby. It was determined that she had died the night before. It appeared she had missed the entrance onto the bridge and drove off the side and down into the river 20 feet below. At some point, she had been ejected from her car. Both roads that led to the bridge had a sharp curve right before the bridge started, so it would be easy to miss the bridge and go down the embankment instead. Police went to Tom and Sandy's house and told Tom that Sandy had been found, but unfortunately there had been an accident and she was dead. At the crime scene, police noted there was blood found on the bridge, which was a little odd. There were also no tire marks or any kind of indication that Sandy had slammed on the brakes or tried to stop the car from going down the embankment. The driver's seat was pushed way back, which was odd because Sandy was only 5'1". So there were some things at the crime scene that made police question if this was an accident. People around town had some questions too. The main one was that Sandy was adamant about wearing her seatbelt. She always wore her seatbelt. Even if it was just a quick trip in the car, she put her seatbelt on. So the fact that she wasn't wearing her seatbelt and had been ejected from the car was surprising to people who knew her. People also wondered what she was doing near the bridge late at night. The road that the bridge was on, it wasn't one of the main roads in and out of Emporia. The road was described by locals as going from nowhere to nowhere. So what was the preacher's wife doing in the middle of nowhere at night? Sandy's autopsy supported the fact that she had died from injuries sustained from being ejected from the car as it went down the embankment. So her death was officially ruled an accident, and Tom began to adjust to life as a single dad to their 3 children. Sandy's death was the talk of the town for a while. At the healthcare facility where Martin Anderson worked, some nurses were discussing what a tragic accident it was, and Martin had overheard. He apparently said to them, "You don't think it really was an accident, do you? Come on, Tom Bird did it." Just 4 months later, on November 4th, 1983, Lorna and Martin and their daughters were driving back to Emporia, Kansas from Manhattan. Not that Manhattan, Kansas. Lorna was driving, but she thought she might have gotten food poisoning. At one point, she pulled the van over to the side of the road along Highway 177. She got out and walked a ways into a cornfield so she could throw up. She then yelled for Martin back in the van and said that she had accidentally dropped the keys when she bent over and now she couldn't find them in the dark. So Martin got out of the van and helped her look for the keys. All of a sudden, a masked man came out of nowhere and pointed a gun at Martin. He demanded Martin hand him his wallet, which Martin did. The man then shot Martin 3 times in his head, killing him. Then the masked man ran off. The most heartbreaking part of this is Martin's 4 daughters were in the van, and apparently one of them actually saw her father get killed. The motive appeared to be robbery, but that didn't make sense to police. Why would robbers hang out in the country hoping that a car would stop so that they could rob them? They got even more suspicious when Martin and Lorna's insurance company called the police a few days after the murder. Martin had been killed on a Friday night. The insurance company told police that Lorna had called them by noon Saturday, the very next day, to ask how much money she was going to get from Martin's life insurance, and she asked how quickly she would get it. As police looked into Lorna, they found out about the other men that she had on the side. They did wonder if maybe one of them was jealous. They wanted Lorna all to themselves, and so they got rid of Martin out of jealousy. But then finding out that Lorna was impatiently waiting for her husband's life insurance money didn't really make her come across as a grieving widow. When they searched the Andersons' home, they found 2 love letters at the bottom of Lorna's lingerie drawer. They were not from her husband. The man who wrote the letters talked about how he couldn't wait to be together after Friday night. This jumped out at police because Martin had been murdered on a Friday night. The love letters were signed Tom, and police soon found out that they had been written by the popular preacher Tom Bird. So those rumors that had went around town about people wondering if Lorna and Tom had been having an affair were true. On December 10th, police talked to a man named Danny Carter, and he added to the speculation against Tom and Lorna. Danny was a welder who had a side gig as a beautician. I found that kind of ironic because they're like on opposite sides of industry fields. Lorna was one of his hair clients. Danny was also one of the men that would come over to Lorna's house to hang out. Danny told police that Lorna had asked him if he knew anybody who would be willing to kill somebody. Danny said no, but she could talk to his brother. Allegedly, his brother, Tom, and Lorna all met and discussed having Martin killed. They apparently offered $5,000 to whoever would kill Martin. This $5,000 came from Sandy's life insurance policy that Tom had received when she died. In the beginning of 1984, Tom and Lorna were both charged with criminal solicitation to commit first-degree murder. Eventually, in 1988, Lorna pled guilty and was sentenced to 5 to 18 years in prison. Tom pled not guilty, but when it went to trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 2 to 7 years in prison. With the true circumstances of Martin's death known, police decided to take another look at Sandra's death. Her death had occurred in Lyon County and Martin's occurred in Geary County. In August 1984, the counties started a joint investigation into Sandy's death to see if it hadn't been an accident. In October 1984, Sandy's body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed. This coroner said her injuries were consistent with being beat with a blunt object and not from being ejected from a car. He also noted that her lungs did not have water in them, so she had not drowned. She was dead before her body ended up in the water. This coroner also noted that she appeared to have defensive wounds on her hands and arms. In February 1985, Tom Bird was officially charged with first-degree murder in his wife's death. That trial began on July 1st, 1985. Prosecutors think that Tom killed Sandy on the bridge and then tossed her into the water. He then set up her car to drive down the embankment and in the water. This would explain why her seat was pushed so far back, because Tom was taller than Sandy. Prosecutors also brought up how on the night Sandy died, Tom had immediately called the police. They said this was not what a person would normally do. If somebody was going to come pick you up and they didn't show up, your first instinct isn't going to be to call the police right away. You're going to try to call that person or people they know to see if they knew where they were. Like I said, you don't immediately call the police like that unless you knew the person was floating face down in a river. Tom's defense admitted that yes, he and Lorna had an intimate relationship, but they claimed it had started after both of their spouses had died. The jury didn't seem to buy it, and Tom was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife, Sandra. He was sentenced to life in prison. Tom requested a new trial, claiming that evidence that showed that Sandy had been thinking about ending her own life had not been shown during the trial, but his request was denied. He was also charged later with the first-degree murder of Martin Anderson, because when Lorna had pled guilty to her part in the solicitation of his death, she said that Tom was the one who pulled the trigger. That trial started in 1990, but Tom was found not guilty because there just wasn't enough evidence to prove without a doubt that he was the one that pulled the trigger that night. Apparently, the jury only deliberated for 75 minutes. That's a super short amount of time. But it's not like Tom could just walk out a free man. He still had the life sentence for killing his wife. To this day, Tom still denies he had anything to do with either death. Tom and Lorna both remarried during their prison sentences. Tom married a school teacher. Lorna was married to one man from 1985 to 1990 and then married another man in 2004. Tom was released on parole in June 2004 and lives with his wife. Lorna was released on parole in February 2007, and her supervised parole ended in 2014 when she was 61. Tom and Lorna both still live in Kansas and are free today. No one has ever been convicted for the murder of Martin Anderson. Who knows if Tom really was the one that pulled the trigger that night, or if they were successful in hiring a hitman. I don't think it's fair that Tom is walking free today. Lorna, I can understand because she was only convicted of solicitation of murder, but Tom was convicted of first-degree murder. I feel anytime you're convicted of first-degree murder, there should be no chance of you ever getting out of prison. It's so unfair that he's sitting at home right now and his wife didn't get to see their children grow up. A CBS miniseries was made based on these murders and released in 1987.
It took place in a sleepy Midwest town.
It starred Jo Beth Williams as Lorna and Terry Keeney as Tom. John Goodman and Kathy Bates also had small roles. I found it free on YouTube, so I watched it because I was a curious kitty. I do have it linked below, but if you watch it, just keep in mind it's a fictionalized version of true events. Obviously, they stretch the truth a little bit, and the storyline doesn't quite line up with how things actually went. They filmed some of the scenes in Emporia, so they asked locals if they wanted to be extras. One lady who had short, spiky hair said she was turned down for being an extra because she didn't look Midwest enough. If you're interested in paranormal stuff, the Rocky Ford Bridge, where Sandra's car and body were found, is allegedly haunted. People have claimed that as they've driven across it, their doors have mysteriously locked and unlocked, or their windows have gone up and down. And some people claim to have heard Sandra screaming while they were on the bridge. I'm not too into paranormal stuff. It's not that I don't believe in it. It's just not too much of an interest to me. But I wanted to include that because sometimes true crime stuff and paranormal go together. That's all I have for this case. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.